Hi, welcome to AshbrookLIVE. Holy shit, it's happened. The thing that I have worried about for years, trends we've seen culminating for a long time, a president who seemed to have no appreciation for American history, for the American ideals, a horde of thugs taking over the Capitol building, an attempted coup, an insurrection anyway, not successful this time, but plenty successful in driving itself right into the heart of the American democracy. An unbelievable week, and yet it is believable if you've listened, if you've paid attention. It's been brewing out there for a long time. It didn't have to happen. We shouldn't be in a situation where this is even on the table, and yet we've left too many things undone. We've elected people to power. We put a president in the Oval Office who is willing to contort, lie, and incite to open insurrection in the heart of the nation's capital. We're going to talk about all this week with the great Zephyr Teachout. We'll look at what's just happened in Washington, and we'll look at the bigger structure of the American economy around all these events that have driven so much for years now and still remain to be tackled. Zephyr Teachout, Zephyr, as in that kind of wind, and Teachout, a name you can't forget, a history, a track record of civic engagement that you've got to admire. Teaches law at Fordham University, but she's been up to her elbows in the real stuff of American politics for years now. Has run for Congress, run for Attorney General in the state of New York, run for governor of New York. In none of those did she prevail, but in every single race she's been in, she has helped change the map of not just New York, but really American politics. The way we talk about the challenges that we're up against now, the way we see the country we live in, the corruption in this country, the accumulation of power. In particular, she's interested in monopolies and how right across the board, big industry is now dominated by super big companies, and the way that that has warped and twisted power away from the people in this country is something that lies behind so much of what's going on right now. Her latest book is Break 'em Up. I can go for that. Recovering Our Freedom from Big Ag, Big Tech, Big Money. Zephyr Teachout, I think, is with us, and let's bring her right in. Hello, Zephyr. I hope you're joining us. Great, there you are. Zephyr, hi, thank you very much for being here.
Hi, it all came through okay? Good.
Yes, it all came through okay.
Good.
You never know these days, and in this week, God knows what's around the next corner. But
yes.
Here we are. Zephyr, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for being here in this week. We really appreciate and have for a long time your big view of what's going on with power in American politics, what's going on with the ordinary American people in this time. This week, we saw something truly sickening happening in our nation's capital. It's hard to say unbelievable. It is astonishing, and yet it's hard to say astonishing when you have a president who's called out for something like this for a long time now.
Yeah.
You've got people doing it in state houses around this country. How do you describe what just happened in Washington, Zephyr?
Yeah, it's a hard thing to get a hold of because it's, as you say, not surprising, very, very troubling, very dangerous. But to me, it's pretty clear that the intended goal, who knows how delusional some people are, but the intended goal was to undermine the peaceful transfer of power. So the intended audience was a social media audience. And one of the things that was really striking was the ways in which all of the people who were rioting and taking over the Capitol were streaming and were very self-conscious about their visual appearance, clearly had this larger audience in mind. And there was no real angle of gaining power. There isn't a sort of clear power source. So I haven't been that worried about Biden being able to be seated. Even as an election lawyer, all of these lawsuits were lawsuits that would be thrown out as a D, as in an election law class. They were not plausible lawsuits. Their goal was to say that certain kinds of votes are illegitimate votes. And very clearly, when they used examples like Detroit, they were signaling that they were saying that Black votes were illegitimate. There was throughout, it's been a very clear story about illegitimacy of people of color having power. That's part of Trump, Cruz, and Hawley's overall story. And then this horrific takeovers goal, the goal of it is to say this is not legitimate. The government is not legitimate. And obviously, so far 5 people have died, which is horrific. The thing that did shock me, and perhaps shouldn't have, but did shock me, was the Capitol Police and the inability of law enforcement, the refusal of law enforcement to stop these sort of domestic, openly racist, openly anti-democratic marauders from taking over the building. And many people have commented, like, if this had been Black Lives Matter, let alone a handful of people protesting who the cops did not feel some affiliation with. I think there's no explanation that doesn't, there's no way to look at this without a racial lens, without an ideological lens, but it still was really shocking to see what they allowed happen. And if they had not allowed it to happen, then effectively nothing would have happened. The social media depended upon them getting inside. And I think it is really critical that there be consequences, that Trump's clear role in aggressively trying to undermine legitimate votes in Georgia, being very clear about his refusal to accept the outcome here, requires impeachment, because the absence of consequences is basically speaking to those who were involved in this, saying, do it again, do it again. And it's building a kind of energy. It's not building governing power, but it's building a delegitimizing power. I found it really disturbing and absolutely essential that we respond. And I'm glad to see, I haven't checked in the last 2 hours, you can tell me, but that there are several lawmakers, Cicilline, Omar, and others have really been pushing for impeachment. As I saw most recently, Nadler was pushing for it, which is great. And Chuck Schumer, who I often disagree with, was pushing for impeachment. All of that's important. And it's important also to push for impeachment and not say, let's wait on the 25th Amendment.
Yeah, Nancy Pelosi says she will bring impeachment forward.
And she said, the only thing I was concerned about, again, I've had a full day, but so you can keep me up to speed, is she should do it soon. And because it's really important to act soon. It's unclear whether the Senate can act after Trump has left office. It's an area that we all have to look into further. It looks to me like there's a significant argument that the Senate can, because part of the traditional, going back to England, role of impeachment is disqualification from office. And it's very clear that Trump should be disqualified from running for office again. I mean,
we've seen the video pulled back up now of Reverend Warnock of Georgia, who is now incoming senator from Georgia, arrested in the statuary hall of the Capitol for praying on his knees, was arrested. Here we had, your word is a good one, marauders. Yeah. Though that has a kind of lack of intent. I kind of like insurrectionists, because I think you're quite right that the goal was to disrupt the counting of the American people's vote for Joe Biden. Yeah. And then at the very least. Yeah. Now, there were a lot of selfies.
And to build energy for a white nationalist movement that does not respect legitimacy of democratic processes.
Exactly. There you go. You saw selfies being taken. We saw ridiculous costumes. Some of those sitting in the chair on the podium, the sort of fur bikini guy with his horned helmet or whatever that was. But buffoonery can sometimes be wrapped around very serious and very dangerous intent. We also saw photos of guys in there with zip ties, pistols on their hips, flak jackets. Who knows if they had found Pelosi, if they had found Schumer, if they had found, at this point, I don't know, Lindsey Graham, what we might have been seeing here. Many have said, you could have had wholesale hostage taking of the elected representatives of these United States. Yeah. And I've seen also the pictures of the Trump family in the tent back down the hill where they had earlier incited all this, watching the crowd go up the hill, kind of like, here we go, here we go. Yeah. I don't know if the president had a specific plan, but we know he's a master of riding waves of chaos and waves of disruption, or he enjoys that anyway. Do you see the potential, no matter how ill-formed or a potential intent of a coup lying in the middle of all this, or not? Is that too much by your lights?
I think the intent is there, but there's sort of multiple intents all at once, and the sort of the effort to put it into a simple, sort of one simple frame. No, I think Trump would do anything to hold on to power. I mean, there's every evidence, there's every reason to think that. I guess what I want to do is, luckily, I think the energy is there on impeachment, and we have to move quickly on it. I think it's essential to move quickly so that he does not retain. Cannot run for office again. But I also
not to remove him. In other words, you don't think there's time?
No, and to remove him. And to remove him. He should not be
time to do that. There's a lot of people saying today on Capitol Hill, there's not time for that. We don't have
there's time for it.
There's not enough remaining days. All they have to do is come in, vote, I guess.
Yes, no, these are simple votes, and the evidence is overwhelming. This is not a complicated tax fraud case. This is about undermining the peaceful transfer of power in multiple explicit on the record ways. This is not going to take days. Is
it automatic that he would not be able to run again for office if he's impeached, or does that have to be stipulated in the terms of impeachment if there's such a thing?
The sort of elements of impeachment, and again, you're gonna have to forgive me because much of this has happened quickly, and I've had a full other day job. So I, especially as a law professor, I'm going to hold off on authoritative speaking, but quite clearly he can be banned from further occupying the office. Whether that has to be stipulated, I would have to check on. I don't think so. I mean, the sort of the old, but that's not my authoritative law professor voice. But I want to emphasize a few things about going forward. One is that there have to be very clear consequences. Otherwise, it will feed this this kind of action in state houses and the federal government going forward. Yeah. And when you talk about buffoonery, I guess I do resist that, because these are people who are playing to a particular audience, which is social media. And this actually relates to my recent book and to something that I think Roger McNamee has written about in Wired just today. It's really important to understand that a huge driver here is Facebook. And I don't mean Facebook because they allow, it's a sort of a passive platform that allows the presence of Trump, election deniers and others. I mean Facebook because they actually have a business model, our communications infrastructure upon which journalists, all news relies and needs to get to the people who are listening, depends upon a business model, which is targeted advertising that rewards high conflict content. So it is not passively allowing white nationalism. It actively promotes white nationalism. It doesn't.
Algorithms are all about pulling that up and giving that pride of place. Because
think of it as, I think one analogy I sometimes use is the targeted ad business model means that the company that relies on targeted ads needs to know as much as possible about you, and then know as much as possible about human nature and what will keep you on the site, because they want to keep you on the site for as much time as possible. So if your public library had a targeted ad business model, you'd walk into the public library and there would be microphones everywhere catching your every whisper, cameras tracking your every move,
where you linger in the stacks, what books you glance at.
And out front would be conspiracy theories and porn. And you'd have as many fights as humanly possible, because what we know about humans is that if there's a fight, people stop, they rubberneck. And so the more conflict there is, the more time you are going to spend there, and the more you're going to be addicted to that. So that is the business model of communications infrastructure at the heart of our democracy. It's not just about allowing Trump to be on there. It's about actively promoting conspiracies, lies, and racial division.
I want to come to that. This is one of the most important industries that you talk about busting up, and we'll come to that because that gets to the structure of this thing. But when I say buffoonery, I don't mean that in a light way. I mean, you've got for even the trappings of all this have been kind of camouflaged with Hawaiian shirts with the Boogaloo Boys and silly names, the Proud Boys, and all kinds of superficially silly or hyper theatrical stuff. Yes, that's good eye candy for Facebook, but it also hides intent. I mean, there are pistols and there are long rifles in long bags.
Is that you think it's a form of masking a deep violent and insurrectionist? Yeah.
It's an acknowledgement that we live in a performative time, and so much of what we saw there was performative. But that doesn't mean at all that it's not capable of consequential outcomes.
Yeah.
And you know, you put up a noose on a gallows on Capitol Hill as if it's a spoof, and the next thing you know, there's somebody in that noose. I mean, these things can go. We know that.
And this goes to something that's just, it's a truly terrifying week, because seeing the Confederate flag in the halls of Congress, seeing sort of embrace of Nazism, seeing embrace, a sort of very public embrace of violent, racist, and bigoted ideologies is really, really dangerous. And we must respond, but it's also, we know that displays like this week have effects throughout the country and on people's lives and on how people feel like they can treat people of color in abusive, violent, and discriminatory ways. And it's so dangerous and so important that we do not just allow it.
I still can't believe
and be honest about our history and be honest about where this comes from. Yeah.
I still can't believe they got in so easily. And I still can't believe they walked out so easily.
I know.
Why weren't there vans, wagons full of people being arrested? I simply don't understand that. This was absolutely illegal to ransack the Capitol, the heart of our democracy. I'm very interested in what comes out of the investigation of the police activity here.
Everybody should be calling for, and people are calling for in New York City, is for leaders of police unions in other places to condemn this behavior, to say this was totally unacceptable. And there's been a lot of silence here in New York City, a lot of silence. That it's one of these moments where it's clear where the accountability lies, but if you see silence on behalf of other police departments for totally outrageous behavior, that's really dangerous too.
I don't know where accountability lies yet when it comes to the policing. I mean, we know that in this country and others, you have sympathizers with the hard right white supremacist movement, and I'm interested to see a full investigation so we know what's really going on there. I mean, there are all these reports of people flashing off-duty law enforcement officers, flashing IDs to on-duty people supposed to be guarding the Capitol on the way in. Of course, we also have elected officials who are among the number storming the Capitol. I mean, this is
and when people talk about healing and moving past, the way that you heal from a deep disease is not by pretending it isn't there.
Well, let me ask you about that, because Joe Biden came out on the day of the storming of the Capitol with a tough message, but at the same time a kind of conciliatory tone, as though he knows he has to defuse a bomb. And it seemed to me, and he wants to be tough in naming what's going on, and he was, but it also seemed to me that he wasn't quite calling it fully out or threatening quite the consequences that need to be there. You've worked in the guards of politics here. Can Joe Biden come in, be a hard ass, take names, and and his administration bring charges? Does he have to tiptoe around? Is he afraid of the whole country exploding?
No. In fact, the opposite is needed. Is that sort of any sign of fear or capitulation or anxiety about sort of losing the support of anti-democratic, racist insurrectionists, any sign of weakness, the smell of weakness is very dangerous. I did not see that particular speech. And again, I don't want to do commentary without, but I will say that I think my sort of, maybe my deepest belief about Biden is that he's a big question mark. And the fact that he moved, having not seen that speech, from really sounding like he was not that interested in pursuing impeachment, to this morning signaling that he thought impeachment was appropriate. That is evidence that the most important political actors right now are grassroots organizers around the country. Because Biden—
How so? How's that work?
Because you've seen a shift. You saw a very short shift. And it came from the bottom up. It came from people saying, no, it came from lawmakers and people demanding accountability. You saw a shift more recently in Biden's approach towards $2,000 relief checks because of local organizing. Biden didn't start out with that. And then the day before the Georgia vote, he's telling Georgia voters, you elect Warnock and Ossoff, we are pushing through this $2,000 relief check. That came bottom up. We have two pieces of evidence so far that Biden— and there's other reasons to think that Biden is movable. The fact that he has moved so much during his career. And also, he's always wanted to be president. So he's always sort of been aiming at a thing. We don't know what he's like when he is in that thing. And I sometimes think he doesn't know what he's like when he is in that thing. And what that means to me is that that there's lessons to learn from the top, but there's lessons to learn from the bottom too. And one of the great sadnesses to me was the diffusing of grassroots energy after Barack Obama was elected. And this time we need to be doing the opposite. It's not wait and see what Biden does. It's lay out. Yes, we need $2,000 checks. We need aggressive action. We need to be moving towards impeachment because he has shown himself to be movable, and he's moved in so many different directions in his career. So it's like this is the grassroots presidency if we make it.
I want to come to your laundry list. You've got a long one, and in your area especially, it's very specific and it's very potent. And I want to talk about that because that gets to the structure behind all this. But I just can't get off this onslaught that we saw on the nation's capital yet, and how lucky we were that it didn't end up with more dead, that it didn't end up with our Congress decimated by violence. When you saw how these protesters were handled, marauders, I like your word better. Did you see, part of me says, part of me asks, was there a directive that came down from on high before this day? Because everybody knew they were coming and the White House had called them. Was it a directive that came down to the DC police saying, go easy on these people? Or was it they were outnumbered so they were afraid to be tougher? Or was it white empathy, like, hey man, I get you. You're white, I'm white, we're here. I'm not going to rough you up. Don't rough me up. Don't topple the statues. We're cool. And you go. What did you see? We don't know the answer, but what did your gut tell you?
We don't know, and I really believe that an investigation is required, regardless of what our first impressions were. So that this is one of these sort of what happened requires immediate, full, thorough communications, testimony, a full investigation, because we don't know. And I don't know. And I guess I want to tell you that I don't know. I don't know what communications might have come from the top. What I saw was a shocking degree of treating these insurrectionists as like me, similar, on the same team. But I want to be very clear that there is no excuse for not investigating. This is a serious legal and democratic, and I guess I resist punditry because I think as somebody who cares deeply about law and democracy, we saw what we saw. We know the incredible comparison with how they have treated other protesters. We all know that as Congresswoman Bush said, that had these been Black Lives Matter protesters, they would have been shot. When we like that, you can see. And we can see an affinity, but we need to know all the facts.
Jumping to conclusions is a big mistake. On the other hand, sort of moving on, not raising the range of questions here is a giant mistake. And I put these on the table in that respect, right? We know that when the president wanted to cross Lafayette Square to hold the Bible upside down, we know there were instructions. Clear that square however you need to do it, go. And they did. So I just wonder, among the questions to be answered, if there was guidance given, if there were instructions.
Absolutely, we have to know. We have to know. We have to know all the communications. We have to know all the emails. We have to know all the phone calls to find out what was going on and what kind of communications were happening.
So you have said Trump has to go, and yes, impeachment's the way to attempt to do it right now. You've also said that members of Congress who were at the same time, that same day and before, that this mob was marching up Capitol Hill, were inside the Capitol building, supporting the president's giant lies about what's just gone on, and insisting that the Congress discount or investigate credible American votes in the service of that lie.
Yeah.
What should happen to those Congress members, Senate and House? Yeah. What should happen with them?
Well, they should resign. But each chamber has, each chamber has the power to expel, and they should be moving forward with expelling those members. And and I believe, and you're going to tax my my research skills again because
no.
But I believe Cori Bush and some others actually have already moved forward with particular articles.
But who should be subject to those? You ran for Congress. If you were there, would it be all those who voted to discount votes in Arizona, all those who spoke against the credibility of the vote? What should the bar be? Is it Ted Cruz and Hawley and all those who voted in the Senate? Is it the 100 plus, many plus, who voted in the House? Who should be expelled? Half the House or a quarter of it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm going to start with the sort of the principles at stake. Is that there are legal principles and democratic principles, and that the institutions of the Senate and the Congress have obligations to make sure that nobody's breaking the law, but that's also the obligation of the state and federal law enforcement. But these institutions also have to make sure that the members are not undermining the institution itself. And so that sort of, to me, is the core principle. And I take your question as a serious one that I have also been thinking about, and I don't feel like I am at a point where I say, here's the precise line. Mm-hmm. But that when you see line crossing, when you see people who are actively participating and actively supporting the riots and marauding of the Capitol, that's a line crossing. Mm-hmm. My own inclination is that the vote alone is not, but I think that like really spending some time thinking about those principles, and I really want to look at what sort of the principles that Bush and others have included in their articles of expulsion.
Bush. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. Because I think that it's that as lawyers, sometimes we want the lines to be totally clear, but you have to make judgment calls. Mm-hmm. And the degree of anti-democratic, peaceful transfer of power, leadership is the wrong word to use, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. Was really dangerous. So those are some of the principles that I would start with. Mm-hmm. That when you see somebody in any institution who is actively undermining the existence of that institution, and the institution here is democracy, then there are other obligations that are outside looking at what the state law and what the federal law may be.
Do you feel the traction on that front? I mean, you're plugged in. You've been called the godmother of this stream of fresh female voices who've come into Congress in recent years. Do you feel the readiness to stand up and do this? Do you feel that in the broader ranks of Democrats in Congress, maybe some Republicans, Mitt Romney looked pretty damn unhappy the other night.
Yeah.
Do you feel a determination to turn to their fellow members of the House and Senate who went down this road and say, out?
Yeah. No, I mean, you see that there, I think the focus is rightly on impeachment at this moment, because it is absolutely essential that Donald Trump not be president for a day longer, and not be able to hold office again. So I think there is the sequencing actually really matters. And also investigations matter. I mean, the kinds of questions you're asking about security are precisely the kinds of questions that I would want to know about members of Congress and what their communications were. Were they cheering on people who were tearing apart, who were trying to get a hold of the votes, of the people's votes? What were those communications? Those would be all really important things to learn much more about. So
I want to begin to bridge toward your interest in tearing up or breaking up American monopolies. But let me do it in this. Let me do it in this
not because
way.
I don't want to talk about this, but because I actually really believe that there's these two paths, and people treat them as different. Like, we have to move forward, and we have to look back. But to me, we have to be serious and just very straightforward about past accountability, but not give too much energy to it, and put the energy into what we can do in this new moment with a new Democratic Senate, a Democratic presidency, and a Democratic Congress. And that Trump thrives on energy. And it's really important not to leave a vacuum there, but to lead.
Well, that's exactly where I want to go, because this accountability is important, as you say. It's vital, as you say. And the bigger project there is, how do we flush this poison out of our system? The president has just excreted and excreted and excreted nonstop, great, ugly clouds of it. How do we flush that out? And it's not just him. The energy behind a lot of Trumpism long predates him, as we well know.
No,
Back to the beginning.
Yeah.
But how do we flush that out? Because you've got people out there right now who are doing victory dances about the ransacking of the Capitol. You've got white supremacists who are in their social media, cheering themselves and, popping champagne corks about this, and are armed and feel that they've advanced. Not, okay, Trump may leave, but they've advanced in a way that they've set an example that could be repeated, that we've seen already in state houses around the country. We could see worse examples of it. How do you aggressively go at that, and at the same time put the energy into the structural changes that might bring some of those people back from crazy town and give them a more palpable stake in America's democracy and economy? And I'm not saying this is just economically disempowered, but we know there's so much injustice, unfairness, concentration of wealth, concentration of power. They're not wrong that things are screwed up in this country. Their answer is a dire threat to democracy, but they're not wrong that things are screwed up.
So I guess the way that I think about this moment, there's so many different strands in your comment there. So I'm gonna start concrete, and then we can go meta again. Is that we have these two tyrannical threats. Mm-hmm. And one comes from a form of white authoritarianism represented by Trump, but as you say, is not it doesn't come from Trump, and it isn't solely Trump. And another form of authoritarianism, which is the Scylla and Charybdis, which is big corporate monopolies who look and act in totally different ways, but also represent a core assault on democracy, self-government, equality, and freedom. And that it is absolutely essential, both because it is a threat and for political reasons, but I think more because it is a threat. I mean, for me, I'll make the political argument, but to me, it's it's not just because it's popular, it's because it's right, is that it is absolutely essential to take on these companies that are increasingly playing governing roles, that are actually directly governing us alongside our democratic forms of government. And I mean companies in the ag industry like Monsanto, owned by Bayer, in the tech industry like Facebook and Google, in the marketplace, Google and Amazon, which is also in logistics, sort of controlling logistics. And I'll focus on Amazon because I think it's the easiest to see. Amazon is a co-governor along with our publicly elected government of
You're going to have to explain that, because a lot of people, no doubt, especially in this COVID hell, have just spent the last 2 months ordering every other day on Amazon something for Christmas or Hanukkah gifts or you name it. And feel like, well, it's kept me safe. It's made my life easier. It's putting presents under the tree and maybe even food on the table from grocery delivery. Is that government or is that service?
Yeah, so the function, I use the function, by the way. I sort of a later chapter, I take on the boycott model. It's that if you have a railroad that's privately owned or publicly owned, and you have an abusive railroad that can effectively tell farmers what prices to choose, discriminate between Black and white passengers, set wages, then you suddenly have a railroad that is playing a governing role, because it is deciding the wages. It is deciding how much that book you bought cost. It is deciding how much each seller has to give Amazon, a sort of private taxation. Amazon charges about 30% from every seller for everything you buy off that. And the name of my book is Break 'em Up, and I love the name, but I've realized that one of the errors is that people think, oh, if we break up Amazon, I won't get same-day delivery again, which is totally false. You'll get faster delivery. That what we're not talking about is destroying the services, but not allowing it to be governed by a private entity who controls so many aspects in an octopus-like way of our economy. Now, I mean, if you think back to the history of corporate law, the first corporations, incorporated areas, were towns. The grant of a corporate charter is a grant of governing power. And the question is the scope of that governing power. And up until the 1980s in this country, lots of ups and downs, disagreements, but everybody understood that private power, when it became too big and controlled too much of our economy, was a threat to democracy. Justice Douglas said all private power inevitably forms into a government in and of itself if we don't use anti-monopoly and antitrust laws. So we understood it as Tim Wu calls it, a sort of proto-fascist threat, that private power is a dictatorial threat, and that to protect our ability to govern ourselves, we need to constantly be vigilant and not allow for private concentrations of power. If you have concentrated power, then it should be governed by the public.
But if Jeff Bezos were here, or Ronald Reagan, I have no doubt they would say, you're on the wrong track. This is about giving people what they want. People want easy access, searchable and convenient to all kinds of products, and we will deliver them to them in with a speed and efficiency that nobody else can do it, and that will keep prices down, and it will keep everybody consuming the things they want to consume. And back off, lady. What do you want? You'd rather have a bureaucrat there deciding which toilet paper I order? I mean, that line of response.
Right. Yeah. So there's a few different things that you said in there, and I want to tease them out. One is the idea is that you can't have nice things unless you have big, concentrated, bloated companies. And the truth is, we know the exact opposite is true. When you have concentrated power, you get that kind of sort of bloat and lack of creativity. And every time the US government has gotten serious about antitrust, like with AT&T or IBM or Standard Oil, you've actually seen a profusion of innovation. So it may be hard to believe, but you break up Amazon by separating the marketplace from the delivery service, you're going to get faster delivery, because right now they don't have the incentive to compete because they control the market. So the one big false vision is the idea you can't have nice things unless you have this kind of like top-down, I decide vision. But the other, which I want to tease out, which is really important, is the idea that consumer prices are the only thing that we should care about when we care about antitrust. And you're exactly right that Ronald Reagan came in 1980 with a very explicit aim to undo the successes of the civil rights movement and to deregulate and transform antitrust laws. And he came in with his California crew, and here we have Biden with a new California crew. He came in with his California crew, Baxter and Miller, Meese, and they talked about antitrust. It was, now it seems like such a sort of weird backwater, but they said, we've got to do something about antitrust, and they did something about it right away. They totally rewrote the purpose of antitrust law. And they said, all along, before 1980, you have thought that antitrust law was about decentralized power. You might have thought it was about actually having competition. You're wrong. Antitrust law is about one thing and one thing only, and it's low consumer prices. And because we believe this, and we also think big companies are efficient, we just are going to back off. It's basically like, we're going to have a law-free zone. Speaking of police allowing the building to get taken over.
Yeah.
Here you have basically Miller as the head of the FTC saying, hey, big companies, you want to break antitrust law? Come on in, go ahead. If you have exclusive contracts with sellers, go ahead and do that, break the law. We've changed the law. We don't respect that law anymore. I mean, it's truly a moment of incredible transformation, because what they said is, look, big companies aren't going to do something that is anti-competitive, because if they do, another company will come in and compete against them. So they're just not going to do anything.
That's ridiculous. If it's anti-competitive and it's successful, it's anti-competitive.
Right. It's successful. They built a fiction. It's often the shorthand is the Chicago School. You can think about Bork, Aaron Director, Richard Posner is a more modern version of this. And a good friend of mine often says, the question is, who's the dupe and who's the con? That some of them really knew that what they were doing was just serving big business. And others kind of loved the elegance and simplicity of the economic world that they created, but it was fantasy economics. It's like fantasy football. It wasn't actually the way power works in the world. And what we've seen, go ahead, is 40 years, because Reagan came in and broke that stuff up, but Clinton didn't change the ideology. Bush didn't change the ideology. Obama didn't change the ideology. So we've had 40 years, which is a really long time, of presidents who've basically said, trust big companies.
Okay, tie that to what we're dealing with this week. And let me ask you about it in this way. There's the straight up racial part of this, and we know that. Yeah. We know that there are white Americans who can't stomach the diverse present and future that is our reality and are trying to resist it. Or to put it another way, some who don't have confidence that they can thrive in the diverse American future, and they're trying to resist it. Yeah. There are others, I would say, and they may be the same, lots of overlap, but who those 40 years have been a really battering time.
Yeah, right.
And who feel that they don't have dignity in this society. And they may be drawn to say that's because my race is being, diminished in its stature, but I'm not sure that's even what it is. But they feel a lack of dignity, a lack of respect, a lack of equity. That money is, you got all these people super affluent all around them in their Teslas, and they're just getting by. I mean, I've had people come to me, and regular working people, and say, Tom, come in here and help us work this out, because I'm furious Everything seems like an assault to me. I feel pinned down from every corner by the demands made on me. I don't feel respected. I don't feel I have dignity. I don't feel I have economic leeway. I have a nephew, works for a big supermarket chain in the Midwest.
Yeah.
He voted for Bernie Sanders when it was Bernie and Clinton, and then he voted for Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And he was gung-ho for he's seen waves of private equity come in.
Yeah.
His company's been bought and sold half a dozen times. Every single time conditions become worse. He's desperate. He's looking for somebody to get him out of this. What is the connection then between this anti-monopoly campaign that you're on and the disgruntlement, fury, disillusion that we see among so many Americans?
Yeah, and there's two categories here. There's one category you're talking about that may be voting for Trump, and then there's another category who are not voting for anybody. The people who are choosing not to vote, from all different backgrounds, who feel like it doesn't matter. And so the way it connects is we've had 40 years of stagnating wages. We've had 30 years of small businesses collapsing. It's harder to start a business now than it was in 1976. And it's for all America's pride about being an entrepreneurial capital. You're better off in Europe if you want to start a business now than you are in the US. Small businesses are suffering. So you have both workers and small businesses who have experienced stagnation and loss and increasing experience of what I think of as a kind of rational paranoia, where they are subject to the forces of a big monopoly that can play with them, experiment with them, pay them differently every month and not tell them why. And that leads to, and I talk to a lot of chicken farmers and Uber drivers, and they have similar experiences because both of them, in one case it's Tyson, in another case it's Uber. Both of them are in a position where they have to take all the risk. They have to buy the chicken house or buy the car. And they are subject to different payment every month, randomly getting cut off. And that rational paranoia, it's really dangerous for politics, because if you can't trust anything day to day, how are you going to trust the news? That rational paranoia and the incredible anger anger at politics for failing to act has definitely seeped into our politics, both in those who have run to Trump and in those who have just decided to check out, because it's like we've seen Democratic presidents and Republican presidents, but the number of Black businesses is collapsing, and we may see half of Black businesses go under in this pandemic, as Bezos is making billions and as big companies are growing and more and getting sort of more and more powerful and gaining more and more control. So that what the Democratic Party used to do at its best is say, no, we're standing up against the middlemen who are stealing from you. And actually there's a great tradition from the 1890s to think of monopoly as a form of theft, like you're just stealing. Mm-hmm. That's why there's a criminal part of the Sherman Act. And so what Biden can do in this moment is say, I am going to stand up against those big companies that are stealing from you. I am not going to allow them to treat you in this arbitrary way anymore. The Secretary of Agriculture can take on incredible monopolies in the ag department.
We've got 4 or 5 meat packers in the whole country.
Yeah, and they're kind of like the mob. They just sort of divide up their territory. And so if you're in one area, you got to deal with one meat packer, and if you're in another area, you have to do another. And they may compete in some areas, but collude in others. And when you only have 4, you don't need to have emails. You just wink. There's a lot of evidence on this that, like, even if you have 3 drug manufacturers in an area, they don't need to have an email between each other to say, let's keep the prices of insulin really high. It's like, okay, they're not lowering theirs, I'm not lowering mine. We're keeping it high. Mm-hmm. And so it's important as a political matter to show that there is strength. It's important as an equality matter. It's important for our economy, which is in dire straits. I mean, there's a reason FDR went to anti-monopoly in his second term, because he saw top-down didn't work. You need to actually empower the incredible creativity and energy of people in this country by giving unions more power and entrepreneurs more power. And so this moment, this is a leadership moment. It's a hard leadership moment. It may not come naturally to Biden, but if he can learn from FDR's second term and say, I'm going to bring into my camp a union of labor and small businesses, and together we will take on the monopolies that are sucking the value out of our society and destroying our democracy. That itself, there's so much executive branch power to do this. But that as a symbolic act and as an effective act would do so much to say, okay, you know what? I actually have somebody who's fighting for me. There's somebody who understands that I, as the small pharmacist, actually, deserve to keep serving the people in my community.
Is he bringing in the people who would do that? You talked about Biden's California crew. Explain that. And then just today, he's got Gina Raimondo, the Rhode Island governor, as Commerce Secretary. Yep. Marty Walsh, mayor of Boston, coming in as labor secretary. Are these and the rest of the crew that he's named? Is this the crew that'll do it?
Well, there's some really bad names and there's some potentially promising ones. So Vilsack is like a punch in the face to people in agriculture. He came in with big promises. I mean, Obama, I'm not saying something in terms of ag that Obama didn't know when he was campaigning in 2007.
But he came in Iowa.
Yeah, came in with big promises and totally failed on them. So the good news is nobody's going to give Vilsack a honeymoon, and maybe he can make up for what he did before. But that was a terrible appointment because he really, really failed to protect farmers, the land, farm workers during the Obama administration.
So what does it say that he's back? Is he back? Is that announced today?
Oh no, he's been back for a while. He's back as Secretary of Ag. Yeah,
that's it.
Oh, it was one of those just like. Oh, it's a horrible moment. Now, when it comes to the AG, it's a bit of a cipher. He actually, I will say, in other areas, he's not necessarily my guy, but he, as a 24-year-old, wrote a law review article that said, hey, efficiency isn't everything. And was skeptical of the Chicago school. So I hope we can tap into Garland's 24-year-old self, like somewhere that's
a long time ago, baby.
We don't know who the assistant, the sort of the key appointments here are the assistant AG for antitrust policy, and that will be really, really critical. Bringing an Obama person would be stupid. I mean, Obama did a bad job in this area. There's no other way to put it. The head of the Federal Trade Commission, and there's a fantastic person right now who's a commissioner, Rohit Chopra, and he's been writing these dissents, kind of like Brandeis used to write dissents, like laying the framework for what it would look like if he were in charge. And if he is named chairperson of the Federal Trade Commission, I actually think that's pretty transformational. There's the FCC. We don't know who's going to run the FCC. Somebody like Tim Wu would be amazing. So it is an area where personnel really matters. But I got to say, as I said at the beginning, I know we're winding up, grassroots matters here too. Biden's put in a lot of people. Oh, and by the way, Becerra was taking on some of the healthcare conglomerates in California. So the fact that he's, we'll see whether he takes on some of the incredible concentration in the hospital concentration, device concentration in the medical industry, let alone pharma. It's going to have to come from the top. It's going to have to come from Biden. Biden is going to have to decide, I am a trust-busting president, because there's a lot of little pieces of power, but you need somebody saying, I understand that we are in a democratic crisis, not just because of Trump, but because of Amazon and Google and because of Monsanto.
Zephyr, yes, we don't have forever now, but paint a picture, because a lot of people are so accustomed to the world we live in.
I know.
Walmarts and giant pharma and Tyson, giant meat, and let alone Facebook, Amazon, Google. This is the world that we're deeply accustomed to now.
Yeah.
What would it look like on the other side of busting them up? Is it like an Etsy world where it's all like little hand crocheted, I don't know what, I'm being facetious, but I think people need help in visualizing what is it mom and pop shops everywhere? How does that work? We're accustomed to all kinds of efficiency. and sort of big delivery systems. How's it work? What's it look like?
Yeah, I think let's just use, I'm going to use one company because I think it'll help. We'll talk about Amazon. So anti-monopoly has a lot of different tools. And so with something like Amazon, the first thing you would do is say, Amazon, the marketplace where you come together with that shoe seller, should not also own delivery and warehouses. Okay. And the reason it shouldn't is because it uses that ownership of delivery and warehouses to basically force sellers to use their delivery and warehouse system, but then also to really bully around the other delivery, the other unionized, like UPS, delivery services. So instead you'd still go to Amazon and you'd look up, okay, I want to find my shoes. And then when you found your seller, the seller would have different warehouse and delivery options to choose between, and workers would not be stuck working for Amazon or a warehouse world that is governed from above by Amazon.
Vertically integrated. And
yeah, they'd have better wages. They'd have better treatment during the pandemic. And so you'd see more unionized. So one sort of concrete effect is you'd see more unionized workplaces, because instead of Amazon or Walmart controlling top to bottom, they can only control one slice. And then there's some areas where you'd say, okay, anti-monopoly law wants to break things up, but it's really useful that we have one or two places where we look for shoes. So let's allow that. That's fine. The way that we decided it's really useful to allow for just a few trains. You don't want to have 5 train tracks running next to each other. But if we're going to allow that, as we did with trains, we say, okay, but then you are kind of quasi-public and you're subject to rules of non-discrimination. You can't sort of do a pay-to-play model, which is right now, where it's like, I'll pay you extra and you get higher ranking in Amazon search results. So you would actually get better quality, workers would get treated better, and you would also have, instead of this concentration of wealth in particular areas where the investors get all the money, you'd have the sellers wouldn't have to spend 30% of their money, 30% of every sale going to Amazon. That seller who's in Cleveland would keep that money in Cleveland. So it's a decentralization of economic power. And that's just one part of the breakup, but I think that helps give a little bit of a picture.
That's good. That's good to hear. Monopolies don't go down without a fight. They've got a lot of money, we know that. And more than that, you've got monopolies that own the information ecosystem now.
Yeah.
Is this doable? I mean, they'll fight this. They'll fight this tooth and nail, right? Jeff Bezos set out from the very beginning to build a vertically integrated company in Amazon. And he's not the only one who, everybody knows big money is in monopoly.
Yeah.
Even if Biden musters every bit of his executive authority, and you're right, and I've been tweeting links to your terrific articles. There's so much power that is vested. He doesn't even need Congress for when it comes to antitrust. But can he do this, given the array of power up against him? Can he pull it off, even if he becomes fully committed?
Yeah, well, I love I love and hate your description of Bezos, but one of the things I want people to take away is stop thinking of Bezos only in economic terms. Think about him as like Alexander the Great. He's like playing Risk. He's trying to get as much control over as many areas as possible.
He's doing pretty well.
And then extract value from it. And once you see him as political, you can actually see the threat better. But the truth is, it's hard. It's really hard. But I think, okay, what would it be like to be an organizer in 1898? Where the Lincoln Republicans have lost. The successes of the Reconstruction are far in the rearview mirror, and there is violence, lynching, total absence of Black Americans' ability to vote. The suffragettes are losing too. There's no real evidence that women are ever going to have the right to vote. And the anti-monopolists are all on their back feet, and there's incredible concentration of power. So yeah, it took 65 years.
Oh
I know. Sorry.
I don't know if we have the attention span.
Sorry, no, we do. But it took 4 years, 7 years to pass the Tillman Act to stop corporations from funding campaigns. It took 12 years to get the Clayton Act to bust up monopolies. The incredible failure of that period was the progressive and populist abandoning of Black allies. But there were short-term successes, and then the New Deal, and then 65, and then 67. And like, I am glad those activists didn't give up in 1897 because the odds are bad. What we have now is a greater sense of what the tools are, but I can't tell you it's going to be easy. It's going to be a long fight. The one thing we know is that every inch we win in this fight matters. So there was this little lawsuit. A private company sues Apple for antitrust violations. And the suit's going forward. We haven't gone to trial yet. Apple immediately stopped charging as much to app developers. You know what that means? That means that somebody in Peoria has a little more money to buy groceries this week and send their kids to a summer camp, although nobody's doing that because it's really pandemic. But you know, just so just one private party suing Apple made Apple say, oh, I better not steal so much. Every single thing that Biden does in this arena matters, and it matters throughout the country.
You've gone out there 3 times to run for office yourself. God bless you. I mean, and you have changed the terms of debate. You've changed the conversation in your realm and beyond. But you've run up against this power. I mean, you saw the big money come in, get behind your congressional opponent.
I know. I like to say I'm the anti-Zsa Zsa Gabor. 3 men spent $500,000 against me.
Right. Yeah. So do you do it again? Do you?
I see. I mean, one of the things that's really changed since 2014, which I'm so excited about, is that the line between being an organizer, an activist, and politician, it used to be like Ken dolls are here and activists are here, and it's a much more fluid line. And I am solidly on the activist side for the time being and enjoying it. So.
Well, enjoy it. We're really grateful for all of the things
so much for
and
the
work
time
you've done for such
this.
a long time. The latest book is Break 'em Up, Recovering Our Freedom from Big Ag, Big Tech, Big Money, and this week from Big Insurrection.
Yeah, I know.
These things are linked. We've got to look at the immediate threat, and we have in this hour, and I appreciate that. We've got to look at the structural issues behind it, and we've done that as well, and I'm grateful for that. Zephyr Teachout,
so much.
Fordham. Thank you very much for being with us. Go on and do great things.